Mixed Messages is a podcast by Bree Graham and Emily Madigan, two mixed women trying to navigate the complexities of living between multiple communities in these divided times. This season, our focus is on politics. Today, we are discussing our experience with politics and introducing a new term, intersectionality. Let's get into it.
Hi, Bree.
Hi, Emma. We're back already.
We're back. I like that we're saying we're back like we went away, but we're not.
We never left.
We didn't go anywhere. We're
here.
Shifting gears. It's fine.
But we are back. Season 2, Red, White, and Vote Blue. That's the unofficial name.
I hate it so much. I did not co-sign on that.
So, okay, fine. Yes, we are back. We are in an election year. And at the time that we are recording this podcast, we have just a little under 2 months before Election Day. So this season, we're focusing on mixed messages in politics.
Yeah.
So before we get into this, Em, I'm curious to know your relationship with politics. Do you love it or do you hate it?
I absolutely hate it.
Seriously?
I hate politics. I hate politics with every fiber of my being. I participate in politics because it's the only way to really exercise our rights as American citizens, or so they tell us. But as far as politics as a whole go and what they have really always been and definitely what they have become in America, I hate them. I think politics are dirty. I think most politicians are liars. I think that it's a lot about power and control and a lot less about actually representing the people that they're supposed to represent. I think the system is broken. I think it needs to be completely torn down and rebuilt. I think we gave it a good shot and we failed, and that's okay. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think we need a completely new system. But as far as politics in general go, I hate it. I absolutely hate it.
So that's awkward because I love it.
I think that's perfect. I think that's why this works so well.
Yeah, no. So that's an awkward segue. I've actually always been super into politics. Have you ever done the Myers-Briggs test, the 16 personalities test?
Which yes, we did that, and I always have to ask you what I am because you remembered or wrote it down or something. I'm thinking like INFJ or something.
Yeah, I think that's you. Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah.
My
mediator.
Yeah. So my personality type is an ENFJ, and the career types that usually the ENFJs, like quote unquote, succeed in are in the realm of philanthropy. And literally, according to 16personalities.com, which is coincidentally the name of my autobiography, my personality type my personality type would be a great politician or doing anything that helps a community organization operate smoothly. I would also just like to name drop that Obama and Oprah are both my personality types. So I'm selfishly really pumped for this season.
I'm so glad you're pumped for this season because this season is giving me hives. I swear to God, I'm breaking out into hives thinking about it. I woke up in a cold sweat because I hate politics. Like I people assume I love them because I'm active in politics, but I despise them. I especially the way it is right now. I think it needs to be. Our political system needs to be redone.
Because of our current political climate, having a conversation about politics can feel, what would you say, Emily? Exhausting, repetitive, overdone.
Accurate.
But if you have been paying attention to the world as of late, and I'm assuming you have because you're listening to this podcast, there has been a lot of misinformation and misdirection when it comes to finding credible and reliable sources as points of education and reference. And though we would love to be the one-stop shop on all things politics, we are not experts. The only things that we have expertise in are our own experiences. Everyone has their political opinions, and believe it or not, on this podcast, while we have very opinionated points of views, and personally, we have a tendency of leaning very far to one side, we aren't here to change your politics. But we are going to talk about how your politics affect us. The reason we wanted to talk about politics for our second season is because of the current political climate that is causing basic human rights to be politicized, and that is a huge no-no. A lot of people are more likely to fight for a cause if they are directly linked to it. If they themselves are impacted by something, then they are more likely to be moved by action. And while in large part, I think that is just plain old human nature, today we want to talk about the ways in which that kind of thinking can be incredibly harmful and how everyone's struggles are everyone's problems. Today, we are talking about intersectionality.
Blah, 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 blah. Is that a bad place for another blah, blah?
Blah, blah, blah.
Blah, 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 blah. Intersectionality is a term that we all need to be aware of. As we are hitting the peak of one of the most profound eras for civil rights, intersectionality is literally at the core of everything, or at least it should be. How many times have you been speaking out about injustice and someone comes at you with, but what about this?
Ugh.
Acting like if you fight for Black lives, then you don't care about the children in cages.
Mm-hmm.
Or people who fight for Black lives, but then turn around and attack and murder Black trans women as if they are separate fights.
According to a good old-fashioned Google search, intersectionality is defined as the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So, if you're like me and your eyes glazed over a little bit after hearing that, let's break it down. The theory behind intersectionality is that people are often disadvantaged by multiple sources of oppression. Their race, class, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, and other identity markers. So an example would be if you identify as a Black male, you still face oppression that comes with being a Black male, but you also get to receive the privilege that comes with identifying as a cisgendered male. If you identify as a Black woman, you would face the oppression that comes with being Black and a woman. So that double whammy of oppression is what intersectionality is referring to.
Intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. Professor of law at UCLA and Columbia Law School, founder of the African American Policy Forum, a leading force and voice in the fight for civil rights, Kimberly Crenshaw has coined the terms critical race theory and intersectionality, both of which are now fields of study and are changing the way we look at civil rights as a whole. A goddess among mere mortals, she has been instrumental in drafting policies all over the world with her work and with her direct action. Now, I could go on and on about this woman, but instead, I encourage you to research her and read her published works and watch her talks online. She's incredible. Intersectionality is so important because, like Bree said, most of the marginalized populations are not just living in one category of discrimination. Kimberly Crenshaw says in her groundbreaking 1989 paper, this focus on the most privileged group members marginalizes those who are multiply burdened and obscures claims that cannot be understood as resulting from discrete sources of discrimination. I suggest further that this focus on otherwise privileged group members creates a distorted analysis of racism and sexism because the operative conceptions of race and sex become grounded in experiences that actually represent only a subset of a much more complex phenomenon.
So, for example, when you think of the suffragettes and their fight for their right to vote, you think of white women picketing and winning their right to vote, placing the privileged members of that group, the group called women, at the forefront of that fight, and the concept of feminism glossing over the equally important and more marginalized groups within that movement, the poor and working class women of color, who did not win their right to vote alongside their white female counterparts.
A further breakdown of the more privileged members of marginalized communities would be like, Black men are discriminated against for their race, but still have male privilege. Now, that one's hard because I know that that is a complicated concept because we do know that Black men have a target on their back, but their privilege is still there. It shows up in subtle ways, but it is still there. Kimberly Crenshaw does a TED talk about it, naming off names of Black men that have been killed by police and having audience members sit down when they no longer know who she's talking about. As soon as she starts naming the Black women that have also been killed at the hands of the police, only 2 women are standing at the end, just as an example. So, moving on. White women are discriminated against for their gender, but still have white privilege. White cis men who are gay are discriminated against for their sexuality, but hold white cis male privilege. If you say Black Lives Matter, then all Black lives must matter. Imagine this. Imagine being a Black person in America. Now imagine being a Black person who was also gay. Now imagine being a Black person who is gay and differently abled. Now imagine being Black, gay, differently abled, and poor. There are very few marginalized people who fall into only one category. And oftentimes, the biggest correlations are belonging to any marginalized category and add poverty on top of that. Poverty is almost always one of the intersections because so many marginalized people are kept where they land on the social ladder by restricting their economic growth.
Okay. Or another example that might not be as obvious. One of the biggest concerns and focuses in this country, and it has been since the beginning, which we will touch a bit later on in this season, has been on and for farmers. And rightfully so. Compared to keeping up with factories and fast and cheap production in all areas, farmers, poor farmers, are always at risk.
But if we are going to fight for our farmers, and we should, we need to fight for all farmers and all who work on farms, whether they own it or not. Our immigrant farmers who have been fighting against the use of toxic pesticides for decades, while also fighting for livable wages and fair treatment, we have to fight for them too. Immigration and farmers, in reality, are intersectional fights. If you want to fight for our poor farmers, then you have to include the fight for immigrant rights, because right now they are the ones working the jobs that many Americans refuse to do. They are the backbone and support for the white farmers that you think of when you think of farming. See, thinking of the privileged members of a group is dangerous. Y'all know there are Black farmers too, right? If you want to fight for the farmers, you have to also join the fight against climate change. As our atmosphere shifts because of our mishandling of and violence against our planet, the reliability of a specific climate needed in order to grow specific crops is a crapshoot.
A crapshoot.
The use of certain, I hate you, not a crapshoot. I'm gonna smack you. The use of certain chemicals killing the insects needed to keep ecosystems going, the destruction of earth and water for fracking, the mistreatment of sacred land, all of these things coincide with one another. They intersect. We are all living and surviving in the gray area of intersectionality, no matter what you may think or have been told. All of our struggles are everyone's problem. The sooner we see that, the higher our chance at slowing the destruction of life as we know it.
My girl Angela Davis said about the civil. I'm sorry, I just love Angela Davis. My girl Angela Davis said about the civil uprisings of the 60s and 70s, and I quote, "Oftentimes today, looking back, we think about discrete and distinct movements. We think that the Black movement was one movement, and then the Chicano movement was over here, and then there was the Native American movement. But all of the movements and the individuals within these movements were connected, and we knew that one movement would not be successful without the other. Today, we talk about the intersectionality of struggles, but I think during that period, we actually lived it. We experienced it." End quote.
In some research I was doing on intersectionality, I came across a quote that I can't remember verbatim, and I apologize, but basically said something to the effect of, we had our own divisions, but when we realized we had the same adversaries, we realized we had to fight and organize together. We are all fighting the same handful of people, technically. One of the biggest points for the argument against immigration is this concept that they are coming to take our jobs, which stems from what? The fear of not having enough, being told by the richest white men in the world that people coming to this country to find a better life, often running from persecution, who hold no power in this country, are the reason that Ted over here can't get a job.
Not Ted.
Often jobs that Ted doesn't want in the first place. They stand behind Ted and whisper in his ear that the brown people are the cause for his problems, while they secretly, or not so secretly, make billions of dollars off of the poorest people, Ted included, and often off of our own tax dollars as well.
There is also intersectionality in our common enemies. White supremacy, capitalism, and the patriarchy are the three fates of our time. Thank you, Emily, for that Hercules reference. working together to create an impenetrable web of legislation, business models, and social, political, and economic monopolies that keep them elevated and the rest of us scrambling to get scraps. If one goes, then they all have to go. And they all have to go. So, one of the things that I vividly remember about Trump's election in 2016, outside of waking up to the news of like vandalism of lockers belonging to Muslim identifying students in high schools who were terrified to return back to school and staying in my bed crying all day, were the organized protests. Do you remember, Em, the women's marches of 2017?
I don't remember a whole lot of that time frame.
Good for you. Yeah. I'm glad you were able to like block that out. That was So, as a refresher, the 2017 Women's March on Washington was a protest caused directly as an effect of Donald Trump's presidential win. I think a lot of us were obviously upset over Donald's win, but maybe more so of Hillary's loss and what that meant for us as a society and as women. It felt like, if I can paint this picture for you, feminist gear was on full display at that time. It was like feminist t-shirts or like nevertheless she persisted, like things from like Patina and like other like stores that just like drove me absolutely crazy. I am guilty. I definitely do have my own feminist sweatshirt.
I have a feminist hat.
Yeah, so like I'm not, but also like look at who's wearing them. Something that really pissed me off was the lack of conversation about intersectional feminism. At that point, I had a lot of people that kept asking me if I was planning on going to the Women's March protests at our Capitol. And if I'm being 100% transparent and honest, I was really pissed off about that. I did not end up going to the Women's March protest because I was so bitter and angry at the fact that, like, not even 5 months before Donald Trump was elected, Philando Castile was murdered by the St. Anthony Police Department here in Minnesota. And the same people that were asking me about going to the Women's March, they didn't ask me to go to any event for Philando. And as a matter of fact, they didn't ask me to go to any Black Lives Matter protest. I was so angry because I felt like all of these people were wearing this feminist gear only meant feminist until my needs are being met. And it's still really, I'm still really triggered to see any white woman that has like a nevertheless she persisted bumper sticker or whatever, because again, it's just like all of those stupid crochet pink cat ears and some of the people who had never ever come out to see or never ever come to any of the protests about Black Lives Matter, all of a sudden in the streets were chanting about their rights. And the Women's March organization itself actually did partner with a lot of other organizations to make sure that they were trying that the conversation was led with intersectionality. But I feel like somehow it got lost in translation to the people that were actually coming to this event. And I just, I'm still, obviously, I still sound like very irritated about it. But, you know, I guess the moral of that story is miss me with your feminism unless it's intersectional.
Period. But I also I still kind of want a crocheted pink cat ear hat.
No!
Girl, that time was a huge issue for me too. Like, I had so many white people attack my views in politics because I said outright that I did not like Hillary. I didn't. And you would not believe the ways people called me out my name. Like white liberals, mostly women. And I had to remind them of Hillary's history of racist remarks and policies. And did I vote for her? Absolutely, because I'm not a sociopath. But did I like her? As a woman, sure, yeah. As a white ally, absolutely not. And that is a perfect example of looking at discrimination from a single axis point, right? Ignoring the other discrimination axis points that affect other groups. And honestly, I feel the same way about Joe. I'm going to vote for him because our lives depend on it, but I'm fully aware that he is not for all of us in many ways. And I'm sure we will get into all of that later in the season.
Oh, girl, you already know. You know.
Listen, but still vote blue. I'm serious. Talk about intersectionality. Brie and I, we are both Black, female identifying sometimes, poor artists with dwindling healthcare or no healthcare. I'm queer, and our lives are regularly attacked on all levels by this administration and their policies, not to mention their murderous followers and their blue blood friends. Look at your own politics and where you stand within certain issues. Now dig deeper and look at how those views may negatively affect others in the community at large. Like, are you a white feminist that gets mad when Black women get jobs over you, claiming they only got it because of affirmative action, but not realizing that affirmative action actually benefits white women more than any other marginalized group?
Yeah, that's something that actually I would like to talk about, which is kind of like a cute little segue into my issue with single issue voters. You know, the people who will only vote for a candidate based on one issue. For instance, a male that I know who voted for Trump because of his stance on abortion. You see, this cisgendered male who was born without a uterus is pro life. And instead of casting his vote for a candidate with an actual vagina who actually has given birth, who actually had extremely informative and objectively reasonable opinions surrounding abortion, he chose to cast his vote for a man who famously would grab them by the because of his pro life stance.
A man who has had many wives and has sexually objectified his own daughters. So, we wanted to touch on intersectionality at the beginning of this season because it informs the ways in which those who fall into the center of the discrimination Venn diagram are the most at risk when it comes to politics and policies, and are therefore the ones who should be considered the most when organizing and creating institutional change. If it's not for everyone, then it shouldn't be for anyone. We have to look at what makes each person in this country and the world unique and what needs they have in order to thrive and not just survive. The people who are the most adamantly against universal healthcare are the ones who can afford to choose their healthcare, giving zero consideration to the communities that suffer from privatized healthcare and ignoring the fact that everyone would benefit from universal healthcare, except for the people making billions off of the collective illnesses of America, but they don't need any more of our money. They'll be okay. So,
The topic of politics can be difficult, but we aren't going to get anywhere at this point in time without engaging with the systems. This isn't going to be a full breakdown of the political systems in place in this country. We are not the ones to do that for you because we're not experts. But what we're going to try to do, and I really want to emphasize try to do, is give you jumping off points or things to look into, history to consider, things to watch out for, and voices to listen to. We are going to do our best to sort through some of the mixed messages in politics. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of Mixed Messages. For more information, check out our website at mixedmessagespod.com. If you like what you hear, leave us a review. The more reviews we get, the easier it is to get our message out. Follow us on all social media platforms. And for extra content, join our Patreon. Thanks for listening. See you next week.